going to take you to a passage tonight that's, as I said, it's not one that is read often. I'm actually going to break a little bit and read from the NIV. If you're following along in the King James, that's fine. But it's a pretty graphic passage and very reminiscent of at least one or two other instances that we read about in the Old Testament. There's something woven in here that's so profound that says two things. One, God is in control. And two, God knows who are His. He knows how to preserve and protect and take care. The assurance that there would be a continuance of a certain group of people. God makes a way even when it seems impossible. I'm taking you tonight to Judges 19. And I said it's a very graphic couple of chapters we're going to be in. And I'm going to read from the NIV. Judges 19, in those days Israel had no king. Now a Levite who lived in a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim took a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. But she was unfaithful to him. She left him and went back to her father's house in Bethlehem, Judah. After she'd been there for 4 months, her husband went to persuade her to return. He had with him his servant and 2 donkeys. She took him into her father's house. And when her father saw him, he gladly welcomed him. His father-in-law, the girl's father, prevailed upon him to stay, so he remained there 3 days, eating and drinking and sleeping there. On the 4th day he got up early and prepared to leave, but the girl's father said to his son-in-law, refresh yourself with something to eat, then you can go. So the 2 of them sat down to eat and to drink together. Afterward the girl's father said, please stay tonight and enjoy yourself. And when the man got up to go, his father-in-law persuaded him, saying, so he stayed there that night. On the morning of the 5th day, when he arose to go, the girl's father said, refresh yourself, wait till afternoon. So the 2 of them ate together. Obviously, the man doesn't want the son-in-law to leave. When the man with his concubine, his servant, got up to leave his father-in-law, the girl's father said, now look, it's almost evening. Spend the night here. The day is nearly over. Stay and enjoy yourself. Early tomorrow morning you can get up and be on your way home, but I'm willing to stay another night. The man left and went towards Jebus, that is Jerusalem, with his 2 saddled donkeys and his concubine. When they were near Jebus and the day was almost gone, the servant said to his master, come, let's stop at this city of the Jebusites and spend the night. His master replied, no, we won't go into an alien city whose people are not Israelites. We will go into Gibeah. He added, come, let's try to reach Gibeah or Ramah and spend the night in one of those places. So they went on, and the sun set as they neared Gibeah and Benjamin. There they stopped to spend the night. They went and sat in the city square, but no one took them into his home for the night. That evening an old man from the hill country of Ephraim, who was living in Gibeah, the men of the place were Benjamites, came from his work in the fields. When he looked and saw the traveler in the city square, the old man asked, where are you going? Where did you come from? He answered, we are on our way from Bethlehem in Judah to a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim where I live. I've been to Bethlehem in Judah, and now I am going to the house of the Lord. No one is taking me into his house. We have straw and fodder for our donkeys and bread and wine for ourselves and our servants, me, your maidservant, and the young man with us. We don't need anything. "You are welcome at my house," the old man said. "Let me supply whatever you need. Only don't spend the night in the square." You have to wonder, had they not listened to this man, but that's another story. So he took him into his house and fed his donkeys. After they had washed their feet, and they had something to eat and drink, and while they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house, pounding on the door. They shouted to the old man who owned the house, "Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him." There's a reason why I'm reading this graphically in the NIV. I hope the King James doesn't say sport. I think they say to know him. This is it's very graphic in the NIV, just said this way. The owner of the house went outside and said to them, "No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this disgraceful thing." This is a little bit reminiscent of Genesis 19, a little bit reminiscent of what happened there in Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is a very strange twist here. "Look, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine." Like, now I'll bring them out to you and you can use them and do whatever you wish. Nice. But to this man, don't do such a disgraceful thing. Think about this. That's pretty off. I know society and the standing of women, that's pretty wild though. Basically take the virgin and take the concubine and do whatever you want. Just don't defile this man. But the men would not listen to him. So the man took his concubine and sent her outside to them. They raped her and abused her throughout the night, and at the dawn they let her go. At daybreak, the woman went back to the house where her master was staying, fell down at the door, and lay there until daylight. When her master got up in the morning and opened the door of the house and stepped out to continue on his way, there lay his concubine, fallen in the doorway of the house, and her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up, let's go." But there was no answer. Then the man put her on his donkey and set out for home. And the missing ingredient here, obviously, she's dead. Because it says, when he reached home, he took a knife and cut up his concubine limb by limb. He wouldn't have done that if she was alive. Into 12 parts, sent them into all the areas of Israel. Everyone who saw it said, "Such a thing has never been seen or done, not since the day the Israelites came out of Egypt. Think about it, consider it, tell us what to do." Then all the Israelites from Dan to Beersheba and from the land of Gilead came out as one man and assembled before the Lord in Mizpah. The leaders of all the people of the tribes of Israel took their places in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 soldiers armed with swords. The Benjamites heard that the Israelites had gone up to Mizpah. Then the Israelites said, "Tell us how this awful thing happened." So the Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, said, "I and my concubine came to Gibeah in Benjamin to spend the night. During the night the men of Gibeah came after me and surrounded the house, intending to kill me. They raped my concubine, and she died. I took my concubine, cut her into pieces, sent one piece to each region of Israel's inheritance because they committed this lewd and disgraceful act in Israel. Now all you Israelites, speak up and give your verdict." All the people rose as one man, saying, None of us will go home. Not one of us will return to his house. But now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We'll go up against it as the lot directs. We'll take 10 men out of every 100 from the tribes of Israel, and 100 from 1,000, and 1,000 from 10,000, to get provisions for the army. Then, when the armies arrive at Gibeah and Benjamin, it can give them what they deserve for all this vileness done in Israel. So all the men of Israel got together and united as one man against the city. The tribes of Israel sent men throughout the tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What about this awful crime that was committed among you? Now surrender those wicked men of Gibeah, so that we may put them to death and purge the evil from Israel." Benjamites would not listen to their fellow Israelites. From their towns they came together at Gibeah to fight against the Israelites. At once the Benjamites mobilized 26,000 swordsmen from their towns in addition to 700 chosen men from those living in Gibeah. Among all those soldiers there were 700 chosen men who were left-handed. That seems to be an important trait because that's what Ehud, one of the judges who was a Benjamite, left-handed. That seems to be a trait of theirs. Each of whom could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 swordmen, all of them fighting men. The Israelites went up to Bethel and inquired of God. They said, "Who of us shall go first to fight against the Benjamites?" The Lord replied, "Judah shall go first." So they inquired of the Lord. The Lord put his stamp of approval on this thing. Just remember that. No matter what you think is going to go on here, the Lord is giving the reply, the instructions. Judah shall go up first. The next morning, the Israelites got up and pitched camp near Gibeah. The men of Israel went out to fight the Benjamites and took up a battle position against them at Gibeah. The Benjamites came out of Gibeah and cut down 22,000 Israelites on the battlefield that day. 22,000. But the men of Israel encouraged one another and again took up their positions where they had stationed themselves the first day. And the Israelites went up and wept before the Lord until evening and inquired of the Lord. They said, "Shall we go up again to battle against the Benjamites, our brothers?" The Lord answered, "Go up against them." The Lord said, "Go." Then the Israelites drew near to Benjamin the second day. This time, when the Benjamites came out from Gibeah to oppose them, they cut down another 18,000 Israelites, all of them armed with swords. Then the Israelites, all the people, went up to Bethel, and there they sat weeping before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening and presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings to the Lord. And the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days the ark of the covenant of God was there, with Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, ministering before it. And they asked, "Shall we go up again to battle with Benjamin, our brother, or not?" And the Lord responded, "Go, for tomorrow I will give them into your hands." And Israel set an ambush around Gibeah. They went up against the Benjamites on the third day and took up positions against Gibeah as they had done before. The Benjamites came out to meet them and were drawn away from the city. They began to inflict casualties on the Israelites as before, so that about 30 men fell in the open field, on the roads, the one leading to Bethel and the other to Gibeah. While the Benjamites were saying, "We are defeating them," as before, the Israelites were saying, "Let's retreat and draw them away from the city to the roads." And all the men of Israel moved from their places and took up positions at Baal Tamar. And the Israelite ambush charged out of its place on the west of Gibeah. Then 10,000 of Israel's finest men made a frontal attack on Gibeah. The fighting was so heavy that the Benjamites did not realize how near disaster was. The Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel. Now, you can say the writer's implication, but whatever the writer's implication is, God was still in control here. You know, when you think that somehow there will never be a wrong that is righted, just remember the Lord is in control. He knows who are His. He knows what needs to be done. It's not always carried out the way we think. Because look at how many people died in the process until finally this thing. It says, "The Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel. On that day, the Israelites struck down 25,100 Benjamites, all armed with swords." And it's not like, yay, this is a victory somehow, because you're going to hear the lament of what is going to be said afterwards. regarding the care to ensure that this tribe is not annihilated. Then the Benjamites saw that they were beaten. Now the men of Israel had given way before Benjamin because they relied on the ambush they had set near Gibeah. The men who had been in ambush made a sudden dash into Gibeah, spread out and put the whole city to the sword. The men of Israel had arranged with the ambush that they should send up a great cloud of smoke from the city, and then the men of Israel would turn in the battle. The Benjamites had begun to inflict casualties on the men of Israel, about 30. And they said, "We are defeating them as in the first battle." But when the column of smoke began to rise from the city, the Benjamites turned, saw the smoke of the whole city going up into the sky, and the men of Israel turned on them. And the men of Benjamin were terrified because they realized disaster had come upon them. So they fled before the Israelites in the direction of the desert, but they could not escape the battle. And the men of Israel who came out of the towns cut them down there. They surrounded the Benjamites, chased them, and easily overran them in the vicinity of Gibeah on the east. 18,000 Benjamites fell, all of them valiant fighters. As they turned and fled towards the desert to the rock of Rimmon, the Israelites cut down 5,000 men along the roads, and they kept pressing after the Benjamites as far as Gidom, struck down 2,000 more. On that day, 25,000 Benjamite swordsmen fell, all of them valiant fighters, but 600 men turned and fled into the desert to the rock of Rimmon, where they stayed for 4 months. The men of Israel went back to Benjamin and put all the towns to the sword, including the animals and everything else they found. All the towns they came across, they set on fire. Now, it says the Lord gave the battle, the Lord gave the answer to go. They inquired of the Lord said go, 3 times go. 3 times while the Lord said go, they were being essentially defeated. And the last round, the Benjamites got theirs. It says the Lord gave essentially the victory to those who were fighting. And if you keep reading here, the men of Israel had taken an oath at Mizpah, "Not one of us will give his daughter in marriage to a Benjamite." The people went to Bethel, where they sat before God until evening, raising their voices and weeping bitterly. "O Lord, the God of Israel," they cried, "why has this happened to Israel? Why should one tribe be missing from Israel today?" Now this is to me, this is an incredible passage. It's almost staggering that in the midst of all this, they're inquiring as to why one tribe should essentially be missing or be blotted out. Why? Because there's 600 men. Now they've taken this oath that they will not give their daughters to marry. That means they cannot repopulate, which means they'd essentially die out and goodbye. They're lamenting. Early the next day, the people built an altar, presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then the Israelites asked, "Who from all the tribes of Israel has failed to assemble before the Lord?" For they had taken a solemn oath that anyone who failed to assemble before the Lord at Mizpah should certainly be put to death. Now the Israelites grieved for their brothers, the Benjamites. Just not my point, and I'll get to my point, but I want you to see something. Even though this act was so terrible, what happened to the Levite, his concubine/wife, the act that happened was so terrible, they were still grieving over what had happened. I get a little impatient with people who say they are Christians and they profess to know this Word of God, and they can't look inside this book and find out, yes, there are people even in Christian circles who will do things to each other. It should bring grief to the heart if somebody says they're part of the body. And these are not Christians. We're just talking about the people of God who had the ability to see this terrible act, to see the casualties that were incurred because of this terrible act, and yet are still grieving, wondering why should there be one tribe missing out of the whole equation. They're grieving over this. And they took a vow, mind you, not to give their daughters. So this is even worse because they know there's certain doom that will come, that this tribe will be no more. Now the Israelites grieve for their brothers, the Benjamites. Today one tribe is cut off from Israel, they said. How can we provide wives for those who are left, since we have taken an oath by the Lord not to give any of them our daughters in marriage? Then they asked, which one of the tribes of Israel failed to assemble before the Lord at Mizpah? They discovered that no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the camp for the assembly. When they counted the people, they found that none of the people of Jabesh Gilead were there. So the assembly sent 12,000 fighting men with instructions to go to Jabesh Gilead and put to the sword those living there, including women and children. This is what you are to do, they said. Kill every male and every woman who's not a virgin. They found among the people living in Jabesh Gilead 400 young women who had never slept with a man, and they took them to the camp at Shiloh in Canaan. Then the assembly sent an offer of peace to the Benjamites at the rock of Rimmon. So the Benjamites returned at that time and were given the women of Jabesh Gilead who had been spared. But there wasn't enough of them. Remember, there were 600 men, and now there's 400 women. The people grieved for Benjamin because the Lord had made a gap in the tribes of Israel. Again, I go back to this. Whether you want to say the writer wrote it like this, but I would tend to say God is in control. He knows who are His. He knows how to preserve. He knows many things that we don't understand. It says here, the people grieved for Benjamin because the Lord had made a gap in the tribes of Israel. And the elders of the assembly said, with the women of Benjamin destroyed, how shall we provide wives for the men who are left? The Benjamite survivors must have heirs, they said, so that the tribe of Israel will not be wiped out. We can't give them our daughters as wives since we Israelites have taken this oath. Cursed be anyone who gives a wife to a Benjamite. But look, there's an annual festival of the Lord in Shiloh, to the north of Bethel, and east of the road that goes from Bethel to Shechem and to the south of Lebonah. So they instructed the Benjamites, saying, go and hide in the vineyards and watch, and when the girls of Shiloh come out to join in the dancing, then rush from the vineyards, and each one of you seize a wife from the girls of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. It's a very interesting treatment of things here. When their fathers or brothers complain to us, we will say to them, do us a kindness by helping them, because we did not get wives for them during the war. You are innocent since you did not have your daughters to them. So that is what the Benjamites did when the girls were dancing. Each man caught one, carried her off to be his wife. That must have been quite a scene. Then they returned to their inheritance and rebuilt the towns and settled in them. In that time, the Israelites that left that place went home to their tribes and clans, each one to his own inheritance. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. Now, what's so interesting about this terrible graphic story that tells you something about these, we know how many thousands of people of the tribe of Benjamin were wiped out. 600 men survived. The grieving and the lament that God would wipe out this tribe this day if it not be for these 400 virgins found in the camp and the rest that seized their wives from the women, the girls dancing at Shiloh. And all this to say, if we weren't looking careful enough, we might say, what would it matter if God eliminated this tribe? What would it matter to us anyway? It would matter greatly. Because if you think about it, I'm not talking about Saul, the first king, but Saul, who became Paul, who descended from that tribe. He says both in Philippians 3:5 and in Romans 11:1. He's a Benjamite. You can see God's hand and God's control and God saying, I got this covered. They're not going to be wiped out. They will continue. And obviously, Benjamin is one of the tribes. Strangely enough, we talk about the last days and the things that I've been discussing. Benjamin is there. When you think about what this means, though, it means that God is in control through this book. Through various, if you read through the Judges, you find that you've got, as I said, Ehud was one of those. And you kind of move through the book and you realize that God was in control of all this. Even I want to put myself in the midst of the battle, in the midst of the people being outraged, in the midst of people saying, how could we even live and tolerate what happened? Let's go do something. And they came as one man to destroy and to take vengeance. Inquired of the Lord, by the way. They didn't just go and say, we're going to do this thing. Inquired of the Lord said, go. And yet there was this remnant, if you want to call it, the 600 spared, that preserved the seed, that made sure that this tribe was not annihilated. The Lord made a way, but more importantly, down the road, the Lord preserved that seed so that that great writer of 2/3 of the New Testament would be preserved for us, raised up to be able to say, and this is how we know the line continue. Now, I'm not talking about where the rest of the tribes are, or who they are. Or I'm simply saying this is one perfect example of showing God's in control. Not only that, but He knows who are His. We don't have that ability. When people start talking to me about, or I hear people saying things about this person, is this person saved or is this person not saved? That's not our business. That's not my business, quite frankly. Anybody who thinks that that's why I live or breathe, it's not my business. That's God's business. It's His. Ezekiel, all souls are mine. Well, then if it belongs to Him, He knows whose are His and what He's going to do with them ultimately. We don't have that knowledge. But just simply here tonight, God's in control. I don't know how many of you have had the experience. I have certainly had the experience of thinking God is not doing His part to take care of those people that I would, in my eyes, I think that, God should be doing something. God should be fixing this problem. Now, unlike the passage here with the man and his wife, and I'm sure as he saw this thing for whatever the reason, however this happened, but it still happened this way. In the big picture, it's almost like God was saying, I'm going to take care of this. And as long as we keep that in our minds, God is in control. Now, the future of this country, which, I've heard people throughout the day say they're worried, they're scared, they're afraid. God's in control. And if you look back at however far back you want to go in history, we've had some really good leaders, we've had some really terrible leaders, but through it all, God's been in control. And the passage tonight tells me God is in control. He saved that remnant, 600, and ensured that the seed and the tribe continued. And the Apostle Paul, obviously, is just one in a sea of that tribe. And it's almost like God put a magnifying glass on the Apostle Paul to say, make sure now, many times over, as I said, Romans 11:1 and Philippians 3, where he says definitively this is his tribe, he is a Benjamite. So if God can take care of those details and be in control of something now we're looking at historically, He can certainly be in control of the things that you think He may not be in control of tonight, at this hour, for some of you who are sick and in very critical condition, and for others who are just worried about the state of affairs of where we are as a country, or what might happen tomorrow or the next day. God is in control. If He can take care of this remnant crowd, He can certainly take care of you and of me. Don't you forget that for a minute. It's a very graphic passage, but it makes the point. And I want you to just kind of settle that in your brain tonight. At least go to sleep tonight with perfect peace. The Lord is in control. He knows what's going on. He knows exactly where I am. He knows exactly where all things are. He is in control. Get on the telephone.